Can't record. So now that I've just missed my whole intro, but that's okay. Why don't you guys go ahead and we'll just join the recording from here.
Excellent. Well, like you said, we're Amy and Nancy Harrington. We are actually sisters. We are not twins, although people think that a lot. And we are best friends. We're business partners, and we're the co-founders of the Passionistas Project, which is a global sisterhood of women who come together to support one another in the areas of business development, personal growth, and social impact. And we just wanted to be here with you today because we also love doing anything we can to empower women. And the basis of the Passionistas Project is storytelling and really listening to one another's stories and trying to experience, to find out what other people experience that you cannot know for not having lived their life. So.
Absolutely. So I'm going to get started with sharing something that, so I was invited to be an author in an anthology called Unshakable, the stories that anchor us, which I think is right in alignment with our conversation today. So that's why I'm going to start with it. And I had no idea what I was going to write for my chapter until I dreamt it the night before and then just wrote it out. And I will tell you, I've never shared this story before with anyone in my life. And by writing that story and by sharing that story, it gave me a lot of personal healing.
Mhm.
It gave me an opportunity to really process and own that moment that I was in. The book isn't launching till a week from Saturday, so I don't want to give the story away. But it starts by sitting in a church pew at a funeral for somebody that overdosed. And I was given a vision of what my life could potentially look like. And that changed the entire trajectory of my life. And so by sharing our stories, not only do we allow ourselves to heal and to really, I mean, I really just kind of moved through that moment as life progressed, and I never really sat with it. And by being able to write that chapter and write about that story, it gave me that time to really sit and be like, oh, yeah, this is how I felt. And okay, let's allow these emotions to come up and all of these things. And I think that's one thing, that's one of the benefits of being able to share our stories. Is there anything that you guys want to add to that side of it as far as having a story that maybe we need to get out that we need to process?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have an anthology book coming out, our first anthology book coming out that we are publishing, and we actually did a different approach with the women. We sat down and we interviewed them and we asked them to tell us their stories. We helped them figure out it's called Awakening Your Power. So we helped them figure out what moment in time they wanted to discuss. And then we have careers in entertainment. We've done over 1,600 interviews with not, for our podcast, but also for the Television Academy Foundation, for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So we've sat down with TV stars and movie stars and musicians and regular hardworking entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And so we use those skills to do our book. And we asked each woman, okay, what story do you want to tell? Tell it to us. And they would tell us. And halfway, we'd let them tell the story. And at the end would be like, that this is really the story that you need to tell, not the story you thought it was. And every one of them was like, oh, yeah, you're right. And they ended up being really vulnerable and going deeper into the darker or the more challenging part of what they had experienced, rather than like kind of the more surfacey version that they had started to share. And each one of them, I think, can relate to what you're saying about that moment of transformation and feeling the power that it gave them to tell their story. But I think they're about to see the impact that sharing those stories have on other women, which I think is the other part of it. so many of these stories, even though each person has their own individual journey, so much of what they're talking about is relatable in some way. You may not have had that exact experience, but you've had something that you are going to be able to draw from what they were vulnerable enough to share. And I think that's beautiful. And then the other part for us is our book is very diverse. It's the core of the Passionistas Project is to have diverse voices. We are an inclusive community, so whether that's women of color or LGBTQ or women with disabilities, we really strive to make sure there's inclusion. And so we let everybody in everything we do, it comes through the voice of the woman who has lived that experience. We don't try and edit what their truth is. And so to really read a story from a Black woman, a story from poem actually from an Indigenous woman, a story from a woman with learning disabilities, you really feel what they have gone through. And it's something that I have not lived, so I haven't gone through it. But now I can understand their journey more, and I think that's really powerful too in the context of storytelling is listening. Um, we really push that concept a lot in the Passionistas. Like the real important part for us of storytelling is listening to the stories. So we're excited that everybody's going to get to read and listen to what everybody else has to say. I think it's
Right.
going to move a lot of people.
That's the other side of it, right? So on one side, you get to process your story, you get to own your experiences and process your emotions and all of those things. But on the other side of it, you now get to connect with another woman or many women or many people that are reading your story or hearing your story or hearing the emotions and the power behind your story, that we are now connected on some level, right? Whether that's about overdosing and drugs and alcohol, which I know many, many, many millions of people can relate to across the world, whether you were the one in it or you were the one on the outside of it, helping a loved one or helping a friend, right? But, or maybe it's a story on divorce or whatever that is, you are now connecting with so many more people across the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's that vulnerability that lets people in, right? That exposing those hard stories and letting women realize that they don't have to put on this front of being perfect, that let the cracks be exposed because people can relate to that and it will help people. And yeah, we have so many stories in our book about, you know, being in a bad relationship. Maybe your relationship isn't as extreme as some of these other relationships in the book, but everybody can relate to that, right?
Yeah.
Everybody can relate to a moment where you needed to stand up to somebody and it was terrifying, but you knew you had to do it and you did it and you survived and you were stronger for it. So I think that it's those moments of vulnerability that let people in and people can relate to it. That's why these stories are so powerful and so impactful and inspiring.
And that to me demonstrates vulnerability as a strength,
Mhm.
which is what us women can do very powerfully, right? That's definitely a feminine strength that we have in wanting to nurture and wanting to heal and wanting, our maternal nature and all of these things, that all of these amazing gifts that we have, when we can learn to see that vulnerability as a strength and not a weakness, so that we can be strong enough and courageous enough to share that story, whether it's on stage or in a book or on a LinkedIn Live or Zoom or whatever it is, right? Let's talk a little bit about that feminine aspect of seeing vulnerability as a strength.
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot lately. I came from the business side of entertainment in that I worked for a studio. So I was in a creative role. I oversaw post-production and visual effects on 250 movies, various stages of development and production and post-production, but I was representing the studio. So I was often the only woman in the room with men, or one of the only women in the room with men. I was younger. I was in my late 20s. So I was the youngest person there most of the time. And I really had to keep a stiff upper lip in the meetings, even if I went into my office and closed the door and burst into tears and did my Holly Hunter for broadcast news, crying for 10 minutes and then like, okay, I got to get back out there. So I learned to not share, and I never shared anything about my personal life. Very rarely did I give any details about myself outside the office. It was very business, you know. And so when Nancy and I started to create the Passionistas Project, which ultimately is this big community of women, it took me especially a really long time to be able to take down those walls and really start to trust other women and want to collaborate and be open to understanding what that looked like and what it meant. And most importantly, to be vulnerable, to actually just, you know, we're supposed to be the leaders of this community. And to me, that meant like, we have to be strong, even though we're stressed out. And then it was like, yeah, I'm a crier. I'm gonna sit here. I'm gonna cry in the middle of this conversation. It's gonna happen. And so once we started to be vulnerable, everybody else started to open up and they started to be vulnerable. And now we have this space where people are just really being themselves. And we've been joking with people lately, like we need to come up with a new word than authentic, because that just sounds so cliche and like a buzzword, but it's true. Like the people that we are in our sisterhood, we're all really authentic with each other. And I think that starts with Nancy and I letting down our guard, leading with that feminine energy of like, yeah, I'm having a bad day. I'm just gonna have to lose it over here. And I need you guys to lift me up today, even though I'm supposed to be the one showing you the way, like it's your turn. I need you
Yeah.
today. And as a result, everybody's really, it's a equal community. There's not this hierarchy, and it's really lovely.
Well, and we have a tendency to do that as women, right? We have a history of being in competition with each other.
Mhm.
And I think that's another great aspect of when we share our stories, we allow those guards and that negative competition to come down. And that is the power, that is another power behind sharing our stories and behind being vulnerable, is getting away from that negative competition or that negative stigma that, oh, she's not being real. She's got an ulterior motive, blah, blah, blah. Right? Nancy, do you want to touch a little bit on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, frankly, it was so beautiful to watch Amy's metamorphosis from being so guarded to being so completely open and vulnerable. And it is what broke down the walls of our community, I think. And yeah, I think, we have been raised since we were little girls to think that the only way to be successful is to be competitive and to be the best, and to, if there was another woman in the room, well, there's only one seat at the table, so we got to fight for that seat. And I think now, we realized, well, no, we don't have to fight for the seat. We can build a new table and invite everyone we know and make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, yeah, I just think that whole competitive, we encounter so many women's groups in our travels day to day, talking to different people. And, there are a few that still bristle, like thinking they are somehow in competition with us. And
Mhm.
it's like, no, no, we want to collaborate. The more we all tell our stories and collectively get together, the stronger those messages will become. So
Yeah.
we never feel like we are in competition with any other women's group or any other, the more storyteller anthology books that are out there, the better. It's not like, oh, buy mine and not yours. Like, buy them all, read them all. Every story needs to be heard, so we
But
break down that barrier of competition.
absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about that perfectionism that we mentioned earlier. I'm doing a research study with women and really diving deep into what they're feeling shifting, what that is, how they're talking to themselves, different questions along those lines, and the tools that they use. And I don't know, probably every other interview that I have, I hear them say, I don't know if I use the right words. I don't know if I describe that the right way. I don't know if this is the perfect way to say that. And every time I tell them, you said it perfectly because that's how it came from you, right? That's how your brain, that's how your person processed that information. Those are the words that came up. It's perfect, just the way that you said it. Don't change it, right? Unless you choose to change it, right? But there's no judgment there. Like, this is your time to tell your story and your version or your definition of embodiment or whatever it is, right? So I think there's this underlying thing in us that we want to be perfect. And so we don't want to write the chapter, or we don't want to write the speech, or we don't want to get on stage, or we don't want to be on the podcast or whatever until we think that our message is perfect. And you know what? It doesn't matter how many times you rehearse it, it's going to come out differently every single time you say it because you're a different version of you, you're in a different energy. It's just going to be different. Each speech, even if it's the same speech, is a snowflake. It's unique, right? So there is no perfect speech. So let's talk, what are your guys' perspective and what have you guys seen, or ladies, what have you ladies seen, or what are your thoughts on that aspect of sharing our voices?
Yeah, I mean, we're Harrington sisters, Catholic school girls, and we are recovering perfectionists. We definitely were those straight A students. We were this shy. Yep, we were this
Oh,
shy
the whole book on
of
it.
being the ones to ask for homework. We didn't do that, but we were right on the cusp of it. So we were taught early on, like you get straight A's, like that is what you do. That is your goal. Even though our parents always, our mother always said to us, as long as you did your best, but we would beat ourselves up about it. Um, when I worked at Warner Brothers, we would prepare like 800-page documents, and I would be like, there's a comma missing, fix it. I have to go into this meeting. I'd be so stressed out if everything wasn't 100% perfect, which I think partly is the response to like women feeling like they need to be 100 times better than the men so that there's no reason for the men to go like, see, she can't keep up. So I was like at the extreme of the perfectionism during that phase of my life. And and I think Nancy and I have continued that. We have very high standards for what we do, and especially since we're serving people, we want the results and what they're getting from us to be the highest quality possible. But I think it was Dr. Melissa Bird who taught a course in our community that was about following your intuition and letting go of perfectionism. And we learned the phrase, done is better than perfect. And we have so completely embraced that. Like, if we were waiting to be perfect, we would never have started a podcast because we didn't know what we were doing. We would never have had our first summit because we wouldn't know how to do that. We wouldn't have started a community because when we started it, we literally were figuring out the technology and how to set it up and what it should include. Like, we never would have started any of the things we've done in the last 20 years in business together because we didn't know what we were doing anytime we started something. And so now it's like I want it to be really good. I want to know, like our mother said, I want to know I did my best, but perfectionism is impossible and it's draining. And at the end of the day, going back to vulnerability and authenticity, what would you rather do? Watch a robot deliver a perfectly stated speech or listen to somebody who's super vulnerable, sharing from the heart and making mistakes?
Yeah.
It's just a
You know,
no-brainer.
the tool that got me out of perfectionism was a 70-20-10 rule that my audit manager gave me in accounting. He's like, look, as long as 70% of the invoices go through just fine, 20% get escalated and 10% we write off, we're happy. And I was
Yeah.
like, you're ready, you're willing to write stuff off? Like, news to me. Like,
When
boosh,
when
right?
I worked in the movie business, we had this big this assembly one time. The big guys were stepping down, and we had had a string of horrible, horrible flops. And the head of the studio said, you know, if someone it plays Major League Baseball and they bat 300, that's really good. That means they miss 70% of the time.
Yeah,
But 300 is amazing. So,
right.
it's like that's a really great stat to keep in mind when you're
Yes.
beating yourself up about something.
So in relationship to sharing our voices, the way that I use that when I go on stage or when I host a workshop or something, I want at least 70% of the audience to take away at least 10% of nuggets.
Mm,
And I
that's
want 10% of the audience to take away at least 70% of my speech.
Nice.
And then
that's
the
awesome.
20% can be in the middle ground in there somewhere. And for me, that takes away the perfectionism of trying to be perfect on stage.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
takes away all of that pressure because if I'm only aiming, if at least 10% of the audience gets a bulk of my message, I mean, that's a success rate, right? But if
100%. Yeah, 100%.
70% get like some sort of like epiphany, like how amazing is that?
That's
Right? But
amazing.
it doesn't have to be 100%. So that's something that I use to take the pressure off of me and to take away my perfectionism. Nancy, what's one of your tools that you use to combat, remove whatever perfectionism when you speak and you share your voice?
What I try to think is if somebody else were in my shoes doing what I'm doing, how would I be judging them? If someone, I had to stand up in front of a room of 50 women the other day and speak, which I am not comfortable with. In fact, I would say the word is terrified. Um, I'm not comfortable doing it. I'm fine on a Zoom now, but I'm still not an in-person speaking type of woman. So I was terrified. And one of the things that I kept thinking to myself is, if there were another woman in this room getting up to speak and she was nervous and she stumbled over her words a little or she misspoke, or I wouldn't judge her. I wouldn't think, oh my God, why is she up there speaking? Who is this woman? I would think, oh, what a brave person for confronting her fears and doing it anyway. And I would be supporting her and trying to uplift her and trying to smile while she's speaking and nod and show her appreciation, right? So I always try to put myself in another person's shoes in a situation like that. And that is in fact what happened as I looked around that room. Every single person in that room, I think they could tell I was a little nervous, but they smiled and they clapped and they laughed and they responded to the fact that I was up there conquering a fear and sharing from my heart. You know.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a great conversation.
Can
Like,
I add one other quick thing to this
yeah, for
particular part
sure.
of the talk? I
Yeah.
was watching a snippet from the podcast Smartless the other day with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and Sean Hayes, and they had John Mayer, the musician, on.
Mhm.
And Jason Bateman, who's been acting since he was a little kid, said, and they were in front of a live audience. It was one of their live shows. And he said, "This terrifies me. Being here in front of all these people terrifies me. I just feel like I like that's my worst nightmare." And John Mayer's sitting there and he looks like he's on his living room couch. He's so relaxed. And he goes, "Really? This doesn't bother me at all." And Jason Bateman said, "How do you get through it?" And he said, "Don't you know that every single person in this room, if you said to them right now, my hotel room got canceled and I need a place to stay tonight, they would say, 'Come on over, you can crash on my couch.'" And he was like, how could you be uncomfortable knowing that all these people want you to come over and crash on their couch? He's like, "That's how I get through it." And it was like kind of what Nancy's saying, like, oh, all these people are on your side. They're all cheering you on. But I thought that was like, and you could just see it in their body language, how differently they felt in front of an audience. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's mindset. It really is like how you are perceiving them receiving you, not how they're actually receiving you.
Well, it's also our relationship with judgment,
Yeah.
right? Whether or not we view judgment in a positive or negative way, whether or not we can choose to view judgment as being vetted. Like I find an honor in being vetted. Please vet me. Make sure my stories are the ones that you want to hear. If they're not, I love you, and go find the right people that you want to listen to. So, I also think that there's a level of being vetted or being judged. Who are you willing to be judged by? How are you willing to be judged? All of these questions dictates how open and how vulnerable you're going to be on sharing your story or getting on stage or having a podcast.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
beautiful.
Right? So I think we could talk about this all day. I think there's so much more to talk about. But thank you so much for being on here, ladies. And I so look forward to having your presence and your support with the SAS Cash and Class Conference in April next year. And if anybody that's listening or will be listening later got any insights out of this, please share in the comments below. Please repost it. I'll post the recording of this on the same LinkedIn live thread so that it's all in the same place. And if you'll please add in your comments, repost it, share it. Somebody needs to hear what we had to say today, and we'll land somewhere. So thank you, Katie and Shirley, for showing up on Zoom. And for those that are going to listen later, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to serving you continuously. And hopefully we'll see you at the conference next April. Thank you, ladies.
Thank
Thank you.